Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Robin Report and Placer AI to our webinar today. I'm Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, and joining me today is RJ Hottovy, who is head of the analytical research at Placer AI. And RJ is going to do a deep dive today for us into the numbers that could actually predict 2024 retail performance. And by the way, at the end of the webinar today, we will ask Shelley Cohan, our executive producer, to join us to help field the questions from our live audience. So keep putting your questions into the chat box or wherever it goes. So at the very end, Shelley will help guide us through your questions. And I think it's going to be a very exciting commentary today. So, RJ, let's get started.
Sounds good.
Please.
Thanks, Robin, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and why don't you first of all, please tell our listeners about Placer AI once again, and also what your role is at the company.
Sure, I'll start with the latter part of that too. As Robin mentioned, I'm RJ Hottovy. I head up an analytical research team at Placer AI. We're an in-house team of industry experts, consultants, analysts, usually with more than 20 years of experience in their given fields. We like to help our strategic customers with bigger picture thematic and strategy questions, but also do a lot of these webinars. If you're not as familiar with Placer AI, I'll start there before we get into some industry trends, some brands to watch, and some strategies that we're observing. But Placer AI, we are a foot traffic analytics company powered by mobile data. In simpler terms, that means we can come up with foot traffic estimates for any physical property in the United States, whether that's an individual retail location, shopping mall, airport, entertainment venue, anything you can draw a shape around on a map, including downtown areas or cities themselves. Anything you can draw a shape around on a map, our platform is designed to come up with foot traffic estimates for that. Well, how does it work? We partner with several dozen mobile app companies, and through those partnerships, we are given anonymized aggregated location data for a panel of more than 25 million devices. Importantly,
Wow.
we do not collect any personal information about those devices. We do not know anything about that device user. We don't want that data. We just want to know the device and where it goes. And you can still make some really strong inferences from that. Things that we'll talk about some of the applications of that. But from those 25 million devices, which represents less than 10% of the device population, we're then able to take AI, machine learning, and extrapolate that sample size, that panel that we see going into different locations, and then come up with full foot traffic estimates for that. Importantly, we work with most of almost 2/3 of the largest retailers in the U.S. Work with a lot of the largest grocery chains, work with a lot of commercial real estate companies, and we check our data with theirs. Generally speaking, we're in the 95% accuracy range. So feel pretty good about the data. But importantly, too, it's not just foot traffic anymore. And I mentioned that, because of the device location, again, it's anonymized, it's aggregated. But what's interesting is if we see a device go back to the same zip code every night, well, we can infer that's probably the home location for a visitor coming into your store, your shopping mall, things like that. And from there, we can, put together a composite of, things we know about that zip code from government data, from, Census Bureau data, from, credit rating agencies, things like that, and start to come up with a, mosaic and come up with demographic information about that visitor coming in, and do it in a way that doesn't compromise visitor security or privacy. That is really central to what we do. There's other things we can do. Visitor journey. Where else are people coming in and visiting to? Are there cross-shopping opportunities with the data? Visit frequency. Maybe you're looking at a loyalty program. You want to understand how many people are coming in. Maybe there's an event that you're monitoring. Maybe you want to see how many people were at the Super Bowl this weekend. Something you can do with our data as well. Maybe there's looking for a particular, maybe you're a mall owner and want to figure out the best fit for an opening there. These are the things that our data is really equipped well to handle. And if you haven't seen our data, please check it out at placer.ai. There is a free version that you can play around with it too, or if you're interested in seeing a demo, we'd be happy to do that. So anyways, let's get to the fun stuff, Robin. And I thought we'd start with 2023, the recap here. And we keep saying this, I think every year we keep looking for a normal year coming out past the pandemic. 21 was kind of the year where a lot of, retailers and restaurants were adjusting to consumer behavior.
Yep.
22 was the year everybody was going to make changes for that behavior, and then inflation hit and changed behavior again, and people have adjusted. 23 was again kind of another year where we saw inflation, but other things too kind of take out, some of the discretionary spending power from consumers. And what's interesting here, so what he's showing is 2023. The darker blue bar is kind of the year-over-year trends for the full year, and then the lighter blue bars are the year-over-year trends for the fourth quarter. And so what we kind of see here is a couple themes. One is that if you look at kind of the best performing categories, value was very much central to consumers' focus last year. You see things like dollar stores, superstores, and grocery stores. And if we looked even more discreetly at that one, we'd see a lot of value chains like an Aldi or Trader Joe's were really the outperformers on that as well. We also see something like beauty and self-care. And so I think in addition to value, one of the other themes we're starting to see coming out of that pandemic is people want to stand out. They want to do things, differentiate themselves, and be unique. And so beauty and self-care is part of that. I mean, there is an element of people just being out in public more, but I think there's more to it than that too. So I think if I leave you with two themes today, it's the idea that value and uniqueness were two
Mm.
major themes. If you do both of those, you're doing very well, and we'll show some examples of that too. But that's kind of the big takeaway. And then the fourth quarter numbers we did see some pressure throughout the fourth quarter. We did see October was a weaker month, some disruption from some of the e-commerce platforms like a Temu, which obviously ran some Super Bowl ads on Sunday. We did see some disruption from weather, but as we got close to the holiday period, we did see a nice strength and rebound there too. So one of the other themes we're seeing is people shopping closer to the actual holiday event, and I think that's going to continue in 24.
Yeah, well, yeah, speaking of holiday, it's kind of in the books now. So what did you learn from retail in the holiday period? Were there any surprises?
No, I think what was interesting too is that it started out a little soft, October, November, early November, were a little bit weaker than expected. But as we got to the Black Friday holiday, and what I'm showing on this slide is the year-over-year visitation trends, as we kind of move through the holiday period. And like I said, didn't see a lot of separation as we kind of moved through October, November. But as we got to Black Friday, we did
Mm.
see a strong rebound, and we saw some categories that had been lagging a lot of the years. So clothing was one that started to really stand out. Particularly the ones, again, the idea that a little bit more individualistic. So an Anthropology or Free People did really well during the holidays. We saw department stores make a recovery, and I think a little bit it was a combination of beauty. Some of that was apparel, and some of that just the fact that people wanted to be out and about and needed a new outfit for holiday parties, things like that. But some of the other ones that we didn't show on the slide too, consumer electronics had been
Mm.
a category that had really struggled last year. No real new product cycles in the category. People had kind of been through the consumer electronics cycle, building a new home office back in 20 and 21. We're really not at that replacement cycle, but Best Buy had a really good holiday season. And so I think what we learned, if anything, is that consumers are still willing to spend, but they are willing to do it right before the events, and they really are looking
Yeah.
for deals. It was a very much a deal-driven consumer, playing the idea of value. Those retailers that did a good job kind of with deals, making sure they had the right inventory in place for it, generally the ones that did very well. So that was kind of, I think, the key takeaway is that people are willing to spend, but it's usually right before the event, and they are very much focused on deals right now. If they think they're getting a deal, and
Yeah.
not just discounts, I think they're really focused on low price points too. That's kind of been the message we've heard from a lot of retailers as we start to see the earnings cycle come up. We're seeing a lot of people focus on low price points. So the ones that did a good job on that, I think, are the ones that really saw stronger visitation trends.
Yeah. Then that goes on and on and on. Price promoting. Anyway, so the strong seem to get stronger, obviously, in 2023 overall. But what are the wider lessons for the retail industry from this performance? What do you guys think we can learn from the wholesale club leaders
Yeah, it's a
specifically?
good question to bring up because that was one of the categories that we did see outperform. And no surprise there. I mean, you've got some exceptional merchants in Costco and Sam's Club and BJ's,
Yep.
all doing a very good job. But I think some of the things, and we'll kind of tie this to kind of a longer narrative here too. But I think what's really interesting about this is that there's certainly a migration play. One of the big themes
Mm.
out of if you're anybody in retail or anybody in commercial real estate, one of the things you have to be aware of is that the trade area of your properties, your stores, no matter where in the country it is. Today, it has changed from what it was 5 years ago. That
Yeah.
may be, people migrating away from cities to more suburban and rural areas. That might be migrating away from markets like New York, San Francisco, and Chicago into markets like Dallas, Central Florida, the Carolinas. And I think the warehouse clubs did a really good job on this because, as people move, you need to, furnish a house, you need to kind of start and kind of, finds kind of your anchor, your anchor stores in that new market. And so if we see like Costco and Sam's Club in particular, in the markets, we saw heavy migration. They did really well. So Texas and Florida saw some really strong results from these warehouse clubs. So I think the lesson you kind of ask about what can we learn from warehouse clubs? It's the idea that be aware of how your trade area may have changed because it almost certainly has. And just because there's a lot of people that move there doesn't mean it's all higher household income people. We also saw some markets that saw higher lower income consumer migration as well. So I think that's the lesson is that be aware of who's in your trade markets at this point too. And then I think the other thing is just merchandising is so important here. You got to have the right products, and that's been kind of the secret to a lot of the warehouse clubs' success. And is it's not a lot of SKUs, but they pick the right ones, and I think we saw a lot of that as well.
Yeah, that migration is really an important issue. And are there any other things about that you should inform us about term
Yeah, it's
migration?
yeah. So what we're showing on this slide, it's a fascinating thing, and it's the amount of time we have a retail management team who we're working with on a project. It's been fascinating the last 6 to 9 months. I mean, I'd say 90% of the cases we look at can almost be traced back exactly to what we saw in terms of migration. So what we're showing here is the percentage increase or decrease by the state level in terms of population. Over the last 4 years, we use November 23 as kind of the last month. We need a
Mm,
few months. We need a few months to observe any kind of changes in migration to make sure it's not just a vacation. So our data is not quite up to date. The 3 day lag that we have with our normal data, it's a little bit. We have like about a 6 week lag for migration data. But what's interesting here too, I mean, I talked about the idea we're seeing movement away from markets like San Francisco, Chicago, New York. You certainly see that. You see the decline in those states, where those cities are. So we see some weakness there. Where are people moving to? Where you see pockets of strength in the Carolinas, in Florida, some of the, upper Midwest, kind of the Montana, Idaho as well.
mm,
Texas was a market we did see some strength as well. It's not maybe as quite as big as we saw in some of the other states, but so again, the idea that we're seeing this migration away from urban to suburban and rural, we're seeing migration away from some of the northern and western markets, largely to the south and southeast. And again, the interesting thing about this is not household income where people are moving to is not created equal. If we overlaid household income on this, we see the higher household income population was also going to the Carolinas and Florida, but less so Texas and Arizona. So it's
mm.
interesting to take a look at this, but I think the key message is that again, your trade area has completely shifted, and it really has changed a lot of the real estate strategies for retailers we work with. One, maybe you thought you were tapped out in terms of growth in the Southeast. Well, now that there's a lot more population there, maybe that's something worth re-examining that. There's also some smaller markets. People are starting to look at markets maybe sub 100, 150,000 population where you
Yeah,
hadn't thought about it in the past, just because maybe that's a market that saw an increase in higher household income individuals. Maybe it's a market with less competition. Maybe it's cheaper to build out. Maybe you're getting better rent. Maybe it's better access to labor than in other markets as well. So a lot of reasons why we're starting to see people, change their real estate strategies, not only where they're opening up stores, but
yeah,
maybe the size of the box as well. So we're seeing a lot of
yeah,
because of
yeah.
migration. And it's been fascinating to watch. So I think that's kind of the takeaway here.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal. But another topic, RJ, is we've all been talking a lot about this return to office, which so how much more of a return should we expect? And how should retailers and restaurants align their strategies?
Yeah, I don't think there's a week that's gone by, certainly in the last year and a half, where we haven't had a discussion about return to office with our
Yeah,
customers. as well. It has been a very popular topic, and a lot of commercial real estate operators that we're dealing with too are looking into this, and it's been fascinating. And what I'm showing here is the percentage of visits compared to pre-pandemic levels. So on the very far end for January 24, you see we're about at 60% recovered where we were in terms of the number of visits coming into. And what we're showing
Mm,
here too is an index of over 1,000 office buildings across the U.S. So pretty representative of the broader U.S. We do see some markets like New York that skew a bit higher than this, kind of in the 70% range. We see some markets like San Francisco that are a bit weaker. Some of that's just dependent on the key industry. A lot more of the financial institutions are bringing people back to the office, whereas the tech offices in San Francisco are still allowing people to work from home. Some of that's the migration we just talked about as well. But what's interesting too is that if we look at kind of just the overall number, this is visits. Remember, 60% of
mm,
visits. If we look at the number of visitors who are coming back in the office, that's closer to 20% or 80%. So we're about 80%
wow.
recovered in terms of the number of visitors. And that's been pretty steady. I mean, if you look here, I mean, we've seen some migration up, but the number of people going in is about at 80%. So that means 20% of people are, permanently working from home, not even doing any kind of hybrid work model. And that's what explains that 60 to 80 difference is that some people are only going in 3 days a week or, whatever it might be. We've seen a little bit of a shift to more of a 4 day of a week kind of as we started in January. So we might start to see this inch up, but I think where we're going to settle is probably not too much further from where we are. I think, kind of we're pre-pandemic, about 10% of the population was permanently work from home. It's probably going to settle in the mid to high teens, I think, is where we're going to end up here. So that
Mm,
obviously that many people are not going in the office. That has implications for where you set up stores. That means more people are going to be buy their homes in the suburbs. That means you may be able to get by with a smaller box in an urban setting. So I think that's got a lot of implications, and there's a big ripple effect across this too. The one thing that is important here too is don't write off urban locations either, because we did start to see a bit of a recovery in some markets that had seen population growth and not as many people coming back to the office. So New York and San Francisco actually saw a rebound in population last summer as
really?
people,
Wow.
yeah, they started to backfill some of the area that had been left by previous residents. So I think that's something that you got to keep in mind that urban's not dead. It's just changing very much. It's the trade area is a lot different than it was before. So something we've been watching with the data.
So yeah, commercial real estate, I guess, is going through a lot of hoops and
They
misses and
are.
so forth. Yeah, big deal.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so if you're comfortable with this, RJ, can you give us a retailer that you think will perform well in 2024 and why? Can you do that?
Absolutely. Happy to do it. And one of the things that, kind of going back to, the start of this too, we talked about the ideas of value, but also unique products and value. And I think that's kind of where we see some real success stories for 24. So start with two, Ollie's Bargain Outlet and Trader Joe's have been
Mm,
really good examples of not only, keeping price points low, but also doing unique products. I mean, I think Trader Joe's has been really interesting in the fact that
yeah,
the pre-pandemic, it actually skewed pretty high in terms of household income compared to some of the other grocery we looked at. It had collective trade area had a household income of, north of $80,000, which is much higher than a lot of conventional groceries. But we've seen that
yeah,
come down quite a bit. And the reason for that is they're starting to pick up a lot of younger customers, a lot of lower income consumers. And I don't think it's just because they're low prices. I think it's the idea low prices with, the private label strategies that they employ, but also unique products. I mean, the amount of websites out there that track new Trader Joe products and new flavors that they're coming out with. So that idea that you're creating excitement and innovation around that low price point, I think has done a lot of that. Ollie's is another one where, I mean, just the idea that they've done a really good job bringing unique merchandise that you can't get anywhere else. Consumers feel like they're getting a great deal out of it just because it is unique. So I think that's been a case where they've
mm,
done a lot of good things on that. Home goods is another one where I've seen just it's not only kind of keeping prices competitive, but also unique merchandise that you can't get anywhere else. Home furnishing in general has been a weird category. It was a weird category in 23.
yeah,
Categories like furniture were way down as kind of, all that demand got pulled forward during the pandemic. Everybody remodeled their house in 20 and 21, bought new couches then. Furniture was a laggard, but we did see strength in home housewares and mattresses last year were two categories that we saw do very well, and home goods being more of a houseware retailer. And we think some of that idea that people were, spending around events and really, emphasizing holiday was one of the big reasons for that. And so I think home goods with that unique merchandise selection, plus the idea that consumers are spending around the holidays also makes it an interesting play. And then Harbor Freight's another one too. Not only the unique merchandise, but also they are benefiting from some of that migration play that that movement away from urban to more suburban and rural. Typically, their locations are more suburban and rural locations. So again, the combination of unique merchandising as well as kind of where people are moving to, I think has really set them up. So just a handful of retailers that have done really well, kind of playing into some of the trends that we're seeing and being able to
Yeah.
capitalize on that.
Yeah. So, who's winning and why. And so, and if you have some more, what are the keys to those who are succeeding? Are there wider themes that can be applied across all retail segments?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we can certainly see here too. The idea that home goods, I mentioned that home furnishing was an unusual category. Typically, you don't see that much variation across subcategories, but we definitely saw some definitive trends. But one of those things is we did see those migration trends across the country. People wanted to maybe not go full out and then invest in new furniture, but they wanted to spruce it up with other housewares, or maybe they're hosting around an event. And so I think the idea of being prepared for that. What that's done is actually drove a lot higher household income for home goods. They've done a good job on that. They've actually been able to go more upstream in terms of demographics and attract a higher income consumer. What's interesting too is that Trader Joe's is actually, I mentioned that they always have had a higher household income, but that number's actually come down. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing here too. Bringing a lower income consumer may not be a bad thing because it's typically a younger consumer. It's kind of an emerging leader kind of consumer, kind of the psychographics that we look at. And what's interesting is now what we've seen across the board in grocery, just over 23 in general, is that people were shopping a wider number of stores than they ever had before. Seeking out deals. We talked about a very deal-driven consumer, and so maybe I see a deal at Aldi, or maybe I see a deal at Walmart. I'm going to go in there and buy it. So people are shopping a wider number of locations than they ever have, but that's put downward frequency on kind of their core store. Maybe you're not going to the your core grocery store as much. And so it's interesting though, players like Trader Joe's and Aldi have actually started to see that visit frequency go up. So not only do they capture more people through some of those deal and low prices, but now those customers are starting to come in more, particularly among this lower income, younger customer.
Another major thing I think that's going on, really fascinating to me, is this so-called secondhand, market, which has been among the most exciting segments in apparel, actually.
Yeah.
So what's the key to their success, do you think, and how do you view the wider apparel categories potential in 2024?
It's a great question, and it kind of ties back to the ideas of value and uniqueness that we talked about early on. There's a lot of consumers, particularly that lower income consumer, that are looking for value, looking to stretch their households' budgets, and secondhand stores are a way to do that. But it's also something where you can get unique products there too. It's not something that you're going to see. You're not going to have that same look and feel that you see a lot that everybody else has right now. So it kind of checks both of those boxes on that front. So we have seen secondhand stores. Not a shock that we see typically a lower household income for shoppers at these kind of stores.
Right.
But at the same time, we saw some really strong visit trends, particularly in the first half of 23. We saw some pressure a little bit in the back half of the year, like we did for a lot of retail chains. But generally speaking, some really strong numbers here. And I think the idea, again, that consumers are looking for value, but also something different at those value price points and not just the same thing you get everywhere else. So, I expect a big year for expansion for secondhand stores as well.
Yeah, and I think the whole sustainability issue, and particularly among younger people, this kind of plays into that a little bit as well. So on to a different kind of industry, actually dining. When you look at the restaurant performance in 2023 and the trends impacting the wider sector, what do you expect in 2024 in this space?
Yeah, I'll start by prefacing that, the results for the three retailers, the restaurant chains we put on here, which are Dutch Bros, Jersey Mike's, and Pliables, that is not
Hmm.
representative of everybody. Generally speaking, visitation trends across the broader dining and restaurant category, we're down year over year. Quick service restaurants were down low single digits,
Wow.
whereas full service restaurants were down mid to high single digits. And not a shock, too. I mean, inflation still was very much a factor for these chains. To be honest, some are still not running at full capacity, not because of pandemic restrictions, just because they can't get labor in these restaurants right now. And so, generally speaking, it was a tougher year. And then what we did see is the kind of the end of the year is that food away from home, which is kind of the inflation index for restaurants, versus food at home, which is the inflation index for grocery, it widened out quite a bit. Grocery, we started to see a decrease in that inflationary headwinds, and we're almost reaching a point of deflationary prices being
Mm.
year over year. That's not the case
Wow.
for restaurants, and so I think that pricing gap, it's something that McDonald's and others have talked about, that right now grocery is more affordable, so that's put some downward pressure. Now, that all being said, there are some success stories in this, and it's important to remember here too. This is an absolute number on these slides. It incorporates both unit growth as well as comparable store sales growth. So for a company like Dutch Bros, continue to see some really strong numbers. That's because they're opening more locations, but in a lot of their locations, I wouldn't say everywhere, but a lot of their locations, they continue to see an increase in visits per location. So, and I think they really focus on the idea of convenience. It's a big play. They're very much a drive-through focus, but also they do skew to a more younger demographic. They have more than just coffee drinks. They have energy drinks and things like that. Now we're starting to see other players start to try to get in that game. McDonald's has rolled out a concept called Cosmics, which is really skews more towards beverages, and they do have some
Oh,
more
yeah.
drinks. So I think a lot of people are kind of seeing what Dutch Bros has done and kind of want to emulate that success. Let's put it this way: if McDonald's is trying to copy what you're doing something right. Uh,
That's
Jersey, Jersey Mike's is also one that's very much a convenience play, and probably not getting as much credit as they deserve. I think they've been disruptive to some of the larger sandwich chains out there,
Mm.
and explain probably why you see some chains like Subway start to shrink and contract the number of locations they have. So they've done a really good job, and I think they're another one that really done a good job picking the markets they're in and picking markets that are seeing higher growth. So another one, and the Pliables, which is more of kind of a health concept. We do see some trends towards that in this category. I wouldn't say it's everybody, but we have seen this shift, and particularly kind of in this fast casual tier. Playa's done a good job, but others like Kava and Chipotle's honestly continues to do very well. And again, your definition of health may be different from others, but generally speaking, ones that kind of market themselves as kind of better for you, or at least organic and natural ingredients, seem to be holding up pretty well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure does. So, if you step back a little bit, RJ, and you look at niche markets, and again, with the strong getting stronger, and also so many chains are expanding, which you had mentioned, and in different formats and so forth. So, how can retailers really succeed and differentiate from what's going on here?
Yeah, and so it's a great question. And so, we see, you mentioned earlier, stronger getting stronger. There's some large chains that continue to take share. And I'd say, generally speaking, it's been a tougher go of smaller chains right now. It's more expensive for those chains. They don't have quite the cost of capital that some of these large chains do. But there are still some winning strategies that these smaller chains have done. And one of the ones that we've taken a notice to is Chicago-based Foxtrot. It's a upscale convenience store market.
Oh, yeah.
And they've done what they've done in Chicago as well as DC. They've got a really good concept, and I think a couple things that they're capitalizing on. One is the idea that we talked about, that you're seeing some recovery in urban locations, and it's the idea, but it's not the same people that were there before. It's generally a younger audience that's coming in, but one that really cares about that market as well. And so one of the things they do really well is localized merchandise assortment. They really tailor each store, not just kind of by market, but each store to, kind of local preferences that they think
Yeah.
is there. And I think that's been one of the real stories of their success. They really do a good job on, which, wine drinkers, nutritionally aware. They can really segment their customers coming in, and they've done an exceptional job. And I think localization is going to be one of those things we hear more and more about in 24 is really tailoring your market, your assortment to what people in that market care about. But that also assumes that you know who's coming in and know your market. So again, the idea that knowing how your trade area, who's in your trade area and how that may have changed, I think is be really important. So I think that's kind of the message is localization and really tailoring your assortment to local preferences is going to be a key thing to success in 24 and years beyond.
Could not agree with you more. That's really another phrase for that is personalization, localization. Yeah, getting close to the consumer and giving them what they want.
Exactly.
So, a last topic here, but really has become more important and in more and more conversations, is this retail media. Um, that was a whole big topic for 2023, and it's continuing in 2024. So, what do you expect do you expect a similar kind of buzz in 2024, or will the topic become less important and less discussed? What are your thoughts on that,
I
RJ?
think it'll be as important, but I think the conversation around retail media will certainly continue to evolve and change. I think, the idea right now in a higher interest rate environment, things are more expensive for the operators themselves. And as a result, they're looking to get more bang for their buck out of their retail stores and finding
Yep,
more ways to monetize and get better utilization. And so when these retailers, these physical store retailers see the numbers that Amazon is putting up for its advertising business, which
incredible. Yeah,
pretty incredible at this point. The numbers, not only the revenue numbers on it, but also the margin numbers on those as well.
yep,
Some really impressive things. And as a retailer, I mean, at this point, most are starting to really develop, and I think really kind of get to know what they're doing in terms of retail media. Not only digital media, but the idea of in-store media is really becoming the next frontier for this category. And so I think
mm,
that's going to be a lot of focus that hey, we've got a better feel for digital media and the digital media network side, but really, can we maximize the advertising opportunities in store? And that might be digital billboards inside the store. That might be
wow,
in the
yeah,
carts. That might be things, a lot of things we may haven't even thought about. I mean, sampling and trialing is kind of a new frontier in this category as well. So I think that we're going to continue to see it. And again, the idea of who are your customers? Who are the people coming in? And so what was shown here is kind of Kroger versus Albertsons nationwide, and kind of Kroger customers, have a higher percentage of fried chicken lovers versus Albertsons, whereas Albertsons have more sparkling water enthusiasts. And so if I had this information, I can go
yeah,
out and find the right partners that would want to advertise in my store and kind of collaborate and partner with me on that one too. So I think that's going to be important. I think, this year, I mean, I think last year was kind of like, is retail media worth it for me? Is there something here? It was kind of a year of discovery for a lot of retailers. I think
yep.
24 is going to be the year where they accelerate a lot of those trends. So I think, it's going to be as popular as ever. Probably not going to hear about it as much, just because I think a lot of people are kind of refining strategies, and probably wait to kind of see some results from that before they start to talk about it again. But it's going to be a popular topic in 24. Let's put it that way.
I totally believe that is going to happen in a big way. And of course, the consumer doesn't know what, they don't relate to a store doing, retail media. I mean, they just all of a sudden they see great posters and streaming videos, and so forth. So yeah, I think it's going to be an
It is, and I think
exciting year.
the challenge though too is making sure you don't diminish the experience too. I think
Well,
that's going to be the
that's
challenge.
true. That,
But I think we've seen some really good success stories. Some players like Walmart and Albertsons have done a really good job early on with the in-store retail media, and I suspect that others are going to follow suit here as well.
mhm. Okay, so let's bring in Shelley, who will have some questions for you, RJ. Shelley, you want to join us?
Hi, RJ. How are you today?
Hey, thanks, Shelley.
Boy, you sparked a lot of conversation. I have so many questions. I hope we have time to get to all of them. So let me start with the first question that I have from our audience, which is based on the industry look back that you gave. In many cases, it showed categories were down in Q4. Do you anticipate this trend moving into Q1, Q2? What are you seeing?
I do, and unfortunately, across much of the country in January, we had bad weather. So I think that that's going to be a factor that, you hate to blame weather on visitation trends, but it certainly was true. And it was almost week by week. We saw another area of this country affected. I mean, I think that second week in January, we saw kind of the, Midwest, Nebraska, Iowa got hit hard. The week after we saw Missouri Valley, we saw Tennessee in that area get hit particularly hard. Obviously last week was the West Coast had bad weather as well. So unfortunately, I do think we're going to continue to see visitation trends down year over year. And partially too, because, a lot of people kind of saved it for the holiday. So between kind of that break period, that shoulder period in between, the holidays and the next event, which, maybe Valentine's Day, probably at least for the dining category and some entertaining category. I think January and early February are going to look a little bit weak. So I think if I had to make a prediction, first quarter, we're going to see trends down year over year. But then we're just going to start to cycle some of that as we get to through the summer. So I think if we're going to look at where visitation trends start to pivot and maybe up on a year over year basis, probably that's as early as I would think would happen. It's probably the third quarter of this year.
Wow, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Second question from our audience is, you mentioned recent strengths in the durable goods categories like furniture and mattresses.
Yep.
Is this increased traffic or another metric? Also, when did you see this shift occur? And lastly, have you seen this shift related to value, like you mentioned in other goods?
So important point of distinction here, the categories that we saw strengthen were housewares and mattresses. So housewares, smaller products, not big appliances or furniture. Furniture categories were still weaker, and so if we look at kind of what's going on here, what was interesting about this, the markets where we saw the biggest strength for mattresses and housewares were actually New York and San Francisco, two of the markets that we talked about early on, where we saw migration away. So populations that have shrunk since 2019. But I talked about that summer bounce, people coming back in those cities, typically a younger population. Well, if you've got a new apartment, well, you still need a mattress, you still want housewares. Maybe you can't quite furnish it with furniture at this point, but you got to get that necessity out there. But what's interesting too, we did see that idea of value playing into this category, even though still we talked about housewares, which are generally more affordable than furniture. But if we separated value furniture, so like the value cities and IKEA versus kind of more high-end furniture, value furniture still did outperform the higher end. Home furnishing in general is that category, a lot like consumer electronics, a lot like sporting goods, a lot like home improvement, where we saw a big pull forward in demand during the pandemic. And we're not quite there at that replacement cycle for a lot of those products. We've seen that normalization, that demand got pulled forward. So those are trending below a lot of the other discretionary categories. But we're going to start to see that. I mean, I think particularly consumer electronics this year, we're going to start to see a bit of that replacement cycle start to kick in. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. I think housewares will continue to do okay because there's been enough migration. Mattresses may cool off, depending on the market. There may still be some pockets of strength, but they may cool off. But I think we're still a little ways away from home furnishing and furniture in general. I think that's still a bit further out because I think probably people are going to look to upgrade home offices before they are ready to make another big investment. Plus, where we are in terms of housing turnover right now, it's still a lot of people are kind of stuck at their homes with interest rates where they are. So it may be a little bit more of an extended cycle before you start to see furniture come back. But value is still holding up better than full price furniture.
Wow, thank you for your clarification on that.
Yep.
So I have a couple questions on trade area migration. I guess this really hit the audience. So the first one is trade area migrating away. So what data should we retailers be looking at to better understand these new trends? And also, is Placer AI able to create data that shows migration specific trade areas, like down to the city and neighborhood levels?
Yeah. We are. We can get down to this granular zip code level in terms of migration, how many people moved into that market, and not only the number of people there too. I mentioned that using other data sets, we don't collect this data ourselves, but we can look at data sets for household income and ethnicity and other things based on other data sets and where people have moved from. Based on that, we can come up with an estimate of how those things may have changed in a new zip code. So that's something that we do have the ability to do, and it's been fascinating to look at because, again, in almost 90% of the cases that we work with a retail management team about a specific problem, a lot of it comes back to migration, not just the number of people, but the composition. We've had a lot of questions about the Dallas market in particular, where there's been a ton of growth in that market, and actually it's the #1 market in terms of overall population growth. But
Yeah.
some retailers, hey, why am I not doing as well in this market? Well, there's been a lot of changes in composition. It's been an older population that's moved in a lot of cases in a lot of zip codes in the Dallas market. And so I think that you have to really understand that market and who's going in at this point too. So yeah, we can get pretty finely there. We can track it as recent as 6 weeks ago. So again, we had showed data as of November 23. We'll have the new data for December coming in pretty quickly. And again, you can track month by month. You can look at the zip code level. Some really interesting stuff to take a look at. And if you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to talk.
Great. Another question on trade area migration is, you mentioned the impact of office workers, and I believe you said 20% still remote.
Yeah.
But the question is, do you
fully
see
remote? Yeah.
fully remote? Do you see this as an opportunity for neighborhood centers? And do you think this is going to stick?
I do. It's interesting, and it's just been really sticky if you look at the numbers in terms of migration. I mean, we've been holding around that 65% recovery, 55, 60% recovery for a while now. And the number of visitors has been pretty sticky, around 80% as well. In terms of the actual cadence during the week, we see Tuesday through Thursday being the heaviest days of people being in the office. Monday, less so, and Friday, nobody's going in still. That may start to change a bit with more and more institutions instituting 4-day a week in the office policies this year. But I think we're going to settle around, like I said, between kind of mid to high teens in terms of where people are just permanently not even coming in the office whatsoever. And that changes a lot of things. That changes a lot of the ways that people in office areas develop things. But the ripple effect, and it's a great question to be asking, is that does present new opportunities in neighborhood centers. And just being able to know where those are, I think we're going to see a nice rebound, and we're starting to see some indication of success in that. I mean, if you look at in the restaurant category, I mentioned that most of the chains are down on a year-over-year basis, but if you look at who's actually up on a year-over-year basis in terms of visitation, it's the chains that were early on to move to the suburbs. So like a Cava, for example, or a Chipotle.
Makes sense.
Make some success or seen some success. I mean, Starbucks is down year over year in terms of visits, but the markets where they have more suburban locations, they're generally outperforming as well. So I think that's just something you got to be mindful, and that does open up new opportunities for neighborhood centers. And that's been where we've seen some real success stories is people, chains, and the operators of those have done really well and have really stood out if we compare it to the national averages.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, now I'm going to put you on the spot here. A couple of our audience members want some specific details. So one question is the off-price retail market still on fire as it was a year ago? Like, TJ Maxx, Ross, Burlington.
It is. If we look at most of those chains, they're up between mid and high single digit in terms of visits. It's been one of the strongest performing category. And again, that's an absolute basis. So that incorporates both new store openings as well as comparable visits. They're doing quite well. And again, the idea of value and innovation or uniqueness, they've really capitalized on that. So it continues to be on fire, one of the strongest performing categories. The whole treasure hunt aspect, I think people are really looking for that idea right now. TJX in particular has done a great job, but by no means, Ross, Burlington, they've all done pretty well, that category as a whole. And no real signs of slowing down either. I mean, I think that's another category that's going to do pretty well in the 24.
Well, thank you for that. And of course, the value helps that considerably too.
Very much so.
Are you seeing any trending retailers in the beauty wellness category that you can speak to?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I talked about that being one of the strongest performing categories, and it makes intuitive sense. The idea that people are starting to be more public, more social, coming out of the pandemic. So that's why I think a lot of that. But to be, I think wrong to assume that that's the only reason why chains are doing better than that. I think Ulta has been one of the real success stories coming out of the pandemic. I think they've done an exceptional job, but it's not just because they're in a hot category. They've really done a good job. The idea of changing up their merchandise assortment to better attract a younger, a more ethnically diverse audience. And we see that with our data. If we look at kind of the overall trade areas, compared to pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic, we see more ethnically diverse. We see a younger population that's coming in. So I think they've done a really exceptional job in terms of merchandising. And then they're seeing where people are moving to as well. They're starting to, build smaller format stores in smaller markets. That's another trend that we're going to continue to see play out in 24. So I think they've done a really good job on that front. Sephora is another one. I mean, even though Ulta and Sephora have these partnerships with Target and Kohl's respectively, it has not really diminished the impact at their standalone stores either. In fact, in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
I think it's created incrementality. And so I think that's another one of those themes that, while maybe the other categories like Kohl's and Target are not doing as well, beauty remains very strong in creating visits to those chains, but also helping to promote the brands that they're partnering with. So it's been fascinating to see. So I think those are two chains, both Sephora and Ulta have done a good job. But, there's been some success stories even in smaller chains in this category as well.
That's great. So in your opinion, you mentioned Temu, RJ, earlier. Do you think they're going to have a massive impact on the foot traffic for the discount dollar stores?
They did in October. If we look at last year, October was the month where you kind of saw the big push from Temu, particularly around the Halloween holiday, and we did see an impact. That was the weakest month we saw for dollar and discount stores last year. I think that kind of cooled off a bit around Christmas time when people realized the lag time on the fulfillment of that product was not it's not Amazon. You're not getting that same day, and so I think that cooled off. I mean, obviously they ran several ads during the Super Bowl, so I think there's renewed interest. I suspect that it could be disruptive for the category, but I think overall the value messaging, and not just value, but the idea too that they've expanded their assortment. The food category in particular has been a major driver for dollar stores as well. And so I think at least Family Dollar and Dollar Tree, Dollar General is still figuring some things out in terms of management changes. And but I wouldn't rule them out either too. I think that, they could really get back into this pretty quickly. So I think that there's some real opportunity. Five Below is another one. And we didn't talk about that in the presentation, but Five Below has really been another breakout story this year. And we're definitely one of the winners around the holidays. So done a really good job. And again, goes back to merchandising, unique assortment, some unique partnerships that you couldn't find anywhere else, but at value prices. That seems to be the recipe that's really working for a lot of retailers right now.
No, thank you for that. Another question I have is from the audience is, are there any statistics? Do you track retail crime issues either nationally or regionally? Is that something you have the ability to track?
We do have the ability to track that. So what we do is we partner with some other data sets, and what we can do is overlay how much crime and the different types of crime in a given market and a given trade area. We have generally seen a little bit, we've seen an uptick in, crime for those retailers that do skew more towards urban areas. But it's not been as pronounced as I think a lot of the media stories have made it seem like as well. Again, it's kind of case by case. There are some certain situations where it definitely has been a headwind to visits. There's been stories about, In-N-Out Burger closing a market in California for the first time. It did look like we'd seen an increase in, crime there as well. So I do think it's a factor, but I also think that there's other issues that have maybe impacting visitation in a lot of those markets as well. Again, so we do have the ability to track crime and crime by type by some of the other data partnerships that we have. But again, it's more case by case. It's hard to give a blanket answer on that one.
Okay, well, thank you for that. It's good to know that you're able to track that. In the tracking, like for 2024 successes, one of the audience members just wants you to clarify, are you only looking at same store traffic? In other words, are you excluding new stores in the data traffic?
No, on the slides we show today, that is an absolute number. So that includes both new stores as well as comparable traffic. So important point of distinction. We're working to build out better tools to actually show it on a comparable basis. But most of the chains I showed, even though I was showing absolute number, if you look on a comparable basis, they generally were up to. But that is an important point of distinction there too. So that incorporates new openings as well as comparable visitation trends as well. So that's not just what the existing stores were doing on a year-over-year basis. That would pick up new stores as well.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. And our last question is, and of course, I'm sure you hear this a lot, although I would imagine you've been using AI for many, many years and you're far ahead of everybody else. But the question is, will AI have an impact on your ability to analyze even more data and understand more precise information about shopper data going forward?
It's a great question, and you're right. It has been. I mean, you can't go anywhere without talking AI these days. And the way AI works, as I explained, we do have a panel of about 25 million devices that we get anonymized data from, and the AI helps us extrapolate that data across a number of variables to come up with an accurate reading on how many people are going into. It's a little bit like a Nielsen rating thing, where we collect a sample and then we can extrapolate based on that. But I do think AI is going to be a game changer for us and others across retail, to be honest. I think for us, it'll be able to get insights quicker. We are working on a generative AI product where that'll help you. You can ask a question in the platform and it'll analyze the data and give you an answer. Why are
Cool.
visitations down in this market? Who are my competitors in a given market? So things that can get you answers and insights that really add value to your business a lot sooner. But I think we're going to see that to be continue to be a major theme across retail and restaurants in the year ahead. I mean, I think certainly there's room for generative AI in terms of marketing and other communication aspects. I don't think we're too far off from seeing that kind of being the ability to kind of adjust merchandising. We talked about the idea of personalization being so key to this, and if AI can help better understand who the people are in a given market, that's certainly something that a lot of chains will adopt and look into. So I think it's really just scratching the surface too. I mean, I think anything that can make our jobs, whatever function you have at a retailer, whether it's real estate selection, whether it's marketing, whether it's strategy, I think there's going to be a place for some sort of AI or generative AI in the years ahead. So we're already starting to see it. We're trying to stay ahead, but it's an exciting space to be in. So
That's great. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions I have, Robin. I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, listen, RJ, it was really delightful to have you on today, and I learned a lot, which I was due from you guys, and I'm sure our audience did as well. A lot of good questions there at the end.
yeah.
So thank you very much again, RJ. Good seeing you.
Yep.
And
Thanks, Robin.
stay
Thanks, Shelley.
warm.
Really appreciate it. I'll try my best.